Louis Rayfield Purnell, Black Aviator and Curator for the National Air and Space Museum. Born 1920, died 2001. Louis Rayfield Purnell was a noted curator at the United States National Air and Space Museum, and earlier in life a decorated Tuskegee Airman. At the time, he became expert in spaceflight artifacts, particularly spacesuits, and was instrumental in curating artifacts related to space exploration during the pivotal years of the 1960s and the 1980s. Purnell was the first African American to become a curator at the Smithsonian Institution. Earlier, as a captain in the Army Air Corps and a fighter pilot, he served in the European and North African theater during World War II. For his service during the war, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters. Purnell was born in Snow Hill, Maryland on April 5, 1920. His father painted Pullman railroad cars, and his mother was a teacher. He was raised in Wilmington, Delaware, and later Cape May, New Jersey. From an early age, Purnell was interested in aircraft and flight. He would ride his bike to the nearby airfield to watch and study the planes in flight. When his African American family moved to a mostly white neighborhood, his father advised him that, quote, in order to appear equal to, you have to be twice as good, unquote. Young Purnell would repeat this advice later in life. Purnell's interest in flight led him to study it at Lincoln University. There he earned his civilian pilot's license, which was a rare achievement for a black man at the time. In the early 1940s, Tuskegee Institute had the only program in the United States that trained blacks in advanced flying techniques. Purnell applied and was accepted. According to Purnell, the program was very competitive, with 2/3 of the trainees failing. Purnell succeeded. Although the program was championed by the likes of Eleanor Roosevelt and received interest from the War Department, the all-white Army Air Corps initially resisted deploying blacks. In 1942, through the activism of a fellow cadet and the NAACP, all-black Army Air Corps units were formed. Purnell was eventually commissioned a captain and served in the 99th Fighter Squadron and later the 332nd Fighter Group. He served 2 tours of duty in North Africa, Sicily, and the Italian peninsula, flying 88 escort missions. He guarded bombers and encountered sometimes open racism from fellow airmen whom he then protected in the air. In between combat tours, Purnell returned to Tuskegee as a flight instructor, but finding combat, quote, safer, unquote, he applied to go back to Europe. For his service, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 6 oak-leaf clusters. After his service in the war, Purnell attended Howard University and obtained a degree in psychology. He worked as a speech therapist and later a government contracting agent. In 1961, he was hired as a specialist by the Division of Invertebrate Zoology at the National Museum of Natural History. Although he took advanced courses in geology at George Washington University, went on exploration expeditions, and got especially skilled in identifying cephalopods and nautiloids, Purnell found them, quote, beautiful, unquote. His successes were seen by some as a threat, quote, both academically and racially, unquote. He was passed over for promotions. In the late 1960s, Purnell applied to join the Aeronautics Department of the National Air and Space Museum. Racism prevented his appointment in the Earth Flight Division, but in 1968 he was hired as a specialist in the Astronautics Department. In 1969, the moon landing occurred and the museum was planning its building on the National Mall. Purnell finally advanced to curatorial status in the early 1970s and became expert in space flight artifacts, particularly spacesuits. He was the first African American to become a curator at the museum. Purnell was noted for his work on the spacecraft and spacesuits exhibit and expanded and cared for the museum's collections until his retirement in 1985. Upon his retirement, he donated his flying wings and other items from the war to the museum. He afterward remained a consultant for the museum and traveled as a lecturer. Early in the year he died, the foreword he wrote for the book Black Nights, The Story of the Tuskegee Airmen, was published. At the time of his death from cancer in 2001, he had been married to his second wife, Joanne, for over 30 years. He had one son and a daughter from a prior marriage and one stepdaughter. Citations are in the description.